In a land where the dead once ruled the living, some souls refuse to rest. 7 jars, 7 fragments, and one woman who carries a curse she never meant to awaken. This is part 2 of the 7th jar of Sechem. For Nancy, life had become a relentless cycle of fear. In the 3 days that followed her opening the jar, the presence she felt in part 1 only strengthened. The disembodied breathing never left her. It trailed her through her small apartment, a spectral shadow she could feel but never see. It echoed through the sterile halls of the conservation lab where she tried to lose herself in work. It followed her down empty corridors where no footsteps, other than her own, ever sounded. But now something had changed. The breathing was no longer just a passive sound. It responded. If she exhaled quickly, a sharp, sudden inhale would answer from just behind her ear. If she held her breath, trying to find a moment of silence, a suffocating pressure would build inside her own lungs, as if something else were inside her, fighting for control of the same chest, demanding the same air. She realized with chilling certainty that what she had unleashed was no longer just lingering, it was trying to live again. And Nancy, with every passing moment, was becoming its body. The morning after her latest episode, she woke with a sharp, burning sting on her shoulder. Disoriented, she stumbled to the bathroom mirror, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. There, seared into her skin, was a new symbol. A curved hook, like an ancient shepherd's crook, glowing with a faint, sickly light just beneath the surface. The second mark, panic, hot and wild, spread through her like a fever. If this was the second, then there would be 5 more. 7 marks for 7 jars, 7 pieces of a soul rebuilding itself inside her. She tried washing it, scrubbing at her skin until it was raw, praying for it to disappear. But the mark only seemed to pulse in response, as warm as a heartbeat that wasn't hers. Driven by a desperate need for answers, Nancy returned to the collapsed tomb. She had to understand the curse that was consuming her. Under the shifting sands and shattered limestone, a new crack had split the earth, a fissure that wasn't there before, as if something deep beneath had pushed its way upward. She clicked on her flashlight, its beam cutting through the oppressive darkness. The light swept over scorched symbols on the inner walls, hieroglyphs that looked as if they had been burned into the stone. A name appeared over and over, repeated like a dire warning. Neb Kasif. She translated the characters with a tremor in her hands. It meant, he who returns by breath. A pharaoh erased from history. Not buried, not honored, but sealed away. Hidden. The papyrus she'd found had only been the trigger. The jar was the container. And Nancy was the doorway. The breath she finally understood was the key. When she returned home that night, exhausted and more terrified than ever, she found something waiting for her. Sitting in the center of her kitchen table was another jar, small, cracked, and glowing with that same faint internal light. Its clay surface looked as though it had been unearthed just minutes before, still caked with dust and grime. Yet she knew with absolute certainty that she had locked her apartment door. As she crept closer, she heard faint whispers emanating from the vessel. It wasn't breathing this time. These were words spoken in a dialect older than any kingdom, a language of shadows and forgotten gods. She reached out with trembling fingers, drawn by a force she couldn't resist, and the jar's lid slid open on its own. A gust of warm, ancient air rushed out, hitting her face. Her eyes rolled back into her head, and the familiar walls of her apartment dissolved into absolute darkness. When her vision cleared, Nancy was standing in a place that defied all logic. She was inside a vast throne room that felt impossibly, terrifyingly alive. Torches burned with an unnatural blue fire, casting long dancing shadows. Hulking guards in archaic armor knelt on the stone floor, their heads bowed not in reverence but in abject fear. At the far end of the hall, seated upon a throne of black gold and obsidian, was a figure, a pharaoh. His face was hidden behind a mask of obsidian and beaten gold, but the mask was cracked, shattered, and then crudely repaired. 7 cracks, 7 jars. He rose from the throne, towering over her, his presence an immense physical weight pressing against her chest, stealing her breath. His voice, when it came, was not a voice at all. It was the sound of breath vibrating through stone, a chilling resonance that shook her to her very soul. My 7th vessel, it boomed inside her mind. I returned through you. Nancy tried to speak, to scream, but her lungs no longer obeyed her. He stepped closer, raising a hand that seemed carved from pure shadow. In 7 nights, the voice promised, the body will be mine. She felt her knees weaken, her strength draining away as if pulled from her by an unseen tide. The mask before her began to crack further, the pieces separating, but there was no face beneath, only a swirling, endless darkness, an abyss that promised to swallow her whole. Nancy awoke on her kitchen floor. The tiles were cold against her cheek, and a dull, throbbing ache echoed behind her eyes. Hours had passed. The afternoon sun had surrendered to the pale glow of streetlights filtering through the blinds. The 2nd jar, the one she'd found inexplicably placed on her counter, was now empty. Its once glowing contents, the shimmering dust she'd inhaled, were gone. And she didn't feel alone inside her body anymore. A foreign presence settled in the back of her mind, a quiet observer, a silent passenger. It was a chilling, invasive feeling, like a stranger had moved into the most private rooms of her soul without knocking. She pushed herself up, her limbs feeling heavy, disconnected. She stumbled toward the bathroom, needing to see her own face to ground herself in reality. But the reflection that greeted her in the medicine cabinet mirror was a distortion of time. As she stood, her reflection did not rise at the same speed. It lagged just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. Its head turned a heartbeat later than hers. A cold dread, sharp and absolute, pierced through her confusion. She opened her mouth and screamed, a raw, terrified sound that tore from her throat. Her reflection, however, didn't. It remained silent, its expression calm, almost smug. Her scream died in her throat as she watched, horrified, as the other Nancy, the one trapped in the glass, moved with a will of its own. It lifted its hand, not her hand, but its own, and the movement was slow, deliberate. Its fingers brushed against its shoulder, right where Nancy felt a searing, phantom pain. It touched the 2nd glowing mark that had appeared on its skin, a twin to the 1st, a hieroglyph that pulsed with a faint, malevolent light. Nancy's voice was a ragged whisper, shaking with a terror she had never known. Please, stop. The reflection didn't stop. It smiled, a slow, cruel curve of the lips that didn't reach its eyes, a smile that promised an ancient, patient victory. And in that smile, Nancy saw not herself, but him, the Pharaoh, Neb Kesef. He was inside her and he was taking over. The changes were subtle at first, but her co-workers at the museum archive noticed. Her voice, usually quick and animated, was now slower, more measured, each word carrying an unfamiliar weight. Her breathing was deeper, more rhythmic, as if she were in a state of constant, deep meditation. And her eyes were the most unsettling. One moment they were her own familiar hazel, the next they would flash with a brilliant, unnatural gold, then return to normal so quickly you'd think you imagined it. Her supervisor, a kind older woman named Mrs. Albright, finally pulled her aside, her face etched with concern. "Nancy, are you feeling well? You look drained. You haven't been yourself lately." Nancy wanted to scream for help. She wanted to tell her everything about the jars, the whispers in the tomb, the reflection that mocked her, the feeling of being a prisoner in her own skin. But as she opened her mouth, a cool, ancient breath filled her lungs. A will that was not her own seized control of her vocal cords. The words that came out were in a voice that was hers and not hers, a chilling fusion of two souls. "I'm fine." Mrs. Albright took an involuntary step back, her brow furrowed. The tone was flat, devoid of emotion, and carried an undercurrent of something ancient. "Your voice, are you sure? It sounds different." Nancy simply nodded, the gesture stiff, robotic. But inside, her mind was a whirlwind of panic. She was screaming, begging for someone to see past the facade, to see the real Nancy trapped behind the Pharaoh's golden eyes. But no one heard. She was utterly, terrifyingly alone. That night, the oppressive silence of her apartment was shattered by her phone ringing. She glanced at the screen and her blood ran cold. The number was impossible. Plus a number that shouldn't exist, a number that shouldn't exist, a call from nowhere. Hesitantly, with a trembling hand, she answered. "Hello?" A voice, weak and filled with static, whispered her name. "Nancy, run." The voice was faint, but she knew it. It was Samir, the lead archaeologist from the dig, the man who had been her mentor, the man who had supposedly died in the tomb, collapsed months earlier, the man whose body they never found. "Samir, is that you? But you're dead." The static crackled, nearly swallowing his words. "Nancy, you opened the first jar? Didn't you?" She froze, the phone feeling like a block of ice against her ear. How? How do you know that?" "I tried to warn you," he rasped, his voice fading in and out. "The jars, they are not treasure, they are vessels. They seek their bearer, the one with the bloodline." Static hissed, a wave of noise that threatened to cut them off. Then his voice came through again, urgent, desperate. "The third jar, it's coming for you. Do not touch it. Do not let it." Suddenly his voice was cut off. A new voice filled the line. It was not Samir. This voice was deep, cold, and dripping with an ancient authority that sent shivers down her spine. It was the voice from her nightmares, the voice of the Pharaoh. "She belongs to me." Nancy dropped the phone as if it had been superheated. It clattered to the floor, the ancient voice echoing from the tiny speaker before the line went dead. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. As if on cue, her apartment lights began to flicker erratically. The shadows on the walls seemed to twist and writhe, morphing into grotesque, unfamiliar shapes. The air, once cool, grew warm, then hot, becoming thick and oppressive, choking the very breath from her lungs. It smelled of dust, of dry heat, of a place that had been sealed for millennia. Then she saw it, sand, fine golden sand and possibly spilling from the ceiling vents. It poured from beneath her locked front door. It seeped up through the cracks in the hardwood floor. It wasn't just sand, it felt alive, purposeful. It swirled around her, collecting in a perfect, mesmerizing circle at her feet. And then, as she watched, paralyzed by fear, the sand began to rise. It spun and coalesced, taking shape, molding itself into a familiar, dreaded form. A third jar, born from the desert itself, materialized in the center of her living room. Nancy scrambled backward, her back hitting the wall with a dull thud. A sob tore from her lips. No, please, not again. The jar pulsed with a soft, golden light, its hieroglyphs glowing in the dim, flickering light of the room. Its lid began to vibrate, a low hum filling the air, a sign that it was ready to open, ready to release its prisoner. At the same moment, the 2 marks on her body burned like fire. She looked down at her arm, and to her horror, a third symbol was beginning to etch itself across her skin, a searing line of light carving its way into her flesh. 1, 2, and now a third. She was being branded, claimed, piece by piece. She knew with a dreadful certainty what would happen next. The jar would open. The dust, the Pharaoh's breath, his soul would be released. And if she inhaled it, if she allowed this to happen, the Pharaoh's soul would be nearly half complete. He would be that much stronger, and she would be that much weaker. Nancy clutched her chest, a sudden, sharp pain making her gasp. Her heart, it didn't feel like her own anymore. It didn't beat for her. The rhythm was slow, powerful, steady. It beat for him. 3 jars awakened, 4 left sealed. And with each one, Nancy loses another piece of herself, another memory, another fraction of her will. The war for her soul has begun, waged in the confines of her own body. But what happens when the last jar is unsealed? What happens when the 7th piece of Neb-Kasef's soul is released, and he finally breathes with her lungs, sees with her eyes, and walks the earth in her skin? In the timeless battle between the living and the dead, what chance does one woman have against a Pharaoh who has defied death for 4,000 years? A king who refuses to stay buried and who has chosen her as his vessel for rebirth. This is not the end. This is only the beginning. Stay with us, for the 4th jar is waiting.